Hello, and thank you for joining us in this third webinar of the series focused on teaching for student success in autumn and beyond. I'm Jessica Phillips, she, her, hers, and I'm Associate Director of Student Experience in the Office of Distance Education and E-Learning. I'm also an adjunct online instructor in Ed Studies and Human Development and Family Studies. I have the pleasure of serving as co-moderator alongside Shri Appalapati today, and you'll get to hear a little bit more about him in just a moment. So our first two webinars focused on reducing stress and building connection and creating inclusive learning spaces wherever and however learning occurs. Both of those offered strategies and resources from a variety of perspectives to help offer student support in the coming autumn semester. In this webinar, we're going to look closely at what university resources are available to students as it relates to meeting their basic needs. So things like wellness, things like food insecurity, access to technology, access to accommodations. We'll explore the instructor-student relationship in this time of COVID as students are grappling with changes to their course structure from online to hybrid to in-person. And we're going to also take a look at gaps in digital skills. So right now I want to turn things over to Shri to go over a few housekeeping items and also to introduce our fantastic group of panelists.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm Shri Appalapati, pronouns he, him, his. I'm a junior engineering physics major on the Columbus campus and director of academic affairs with undergraduate student government. So to start off with housekeeping, in order to lower our bandwidth and hopefully prevent any major delays in your videos and microphones are turned off. As for asking for questions, use the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen. We'll be using the chat function to share resources with all of you, but please use the Q&A tool instead of the chat function to ask questions. You can start asking your questions at any time, and we'll do our best to address them during the Q&A session in the latter half of our meeting. You can also view the answered section in the Q&A to see if your question has already been addressed directly in the chat. Also, thank you to everyone who submit questions in advance. We'll answer some of those questions in the initial presentations and then answer some during the Q&A session. As a final note, the recordings and slides from this and other town halls will be available on the Drake Institute website, and we'll follow up later this week with links to today's recording, slides, and the resources we mentioned today. And you can check the chat for some of those links now. Now with that out of the way, I'd like to welcome our panel of distinguished guests who will be guiding us through today's conversation. First off, Shauna Jaggers, she, her, hers, Assistant Vice Provost of Research and Program Assessment in the Office of Student Academic Success. Michaela Martin is an Assistant Director in the Student Life Student Wellness Center. Cheryl Lyons, she, her, hers, is the Director, Michaela's pronouns are she, her, hers as well. Cheryl Lyons, she, her, hers, is the Director of Student Life Disability Services. Jasmine Roberts, she, her, hers, is a lecturer in the School of Communication. Zach Wilcox, he, him, his, economics major, senior, Columbus campus, in development of his own app called Odd Jobs. Liz Webb, she, her, hers, is a senior public management, leadership, and policy major on the Columbus campus. She's also involved in undergraduate student government. And helping out behind the scenes in the Q&A chat, we have Amy Treboni, she, her, hers, Senior Director of Advising. Dawn Kitchen, she, her, hers, Associate Dean on the Mansfield campus. Meg Daly, she, her, hers, Associate Dean of Undergraduate Education. Thank you, panelists, for joining us. So to start us off, Shauna, you've worked on a university-wide study about the effects of COVID-19 shutdown, about the effects the COVID-19 shutdown had on teaching and learning. What were some key findings related to challenges students experienced that reflect the need for connections to resources?
Thanks, Shri. Well, we had about 3,400 undergraduates respond to our survey this spring, and there were many findings from the survey, some of which are covered in other webinars in the series. But for today, I wanted to talk about some of the students' basic needs that need to be met in order for them to be able to be successful with their learning. So after spring break, we asked students specifically about two key needs, which was food and technology for learning. So based on the USDA short form, about a quarter of our undergraduates had some form of food insecurity in that chaotic period after spring break. And based on their responses to a series of questions about computer and internet access, we estimate that about a quarter also had inadequate internet or devices to fully participate in online learning. And that included about 10% whose primary method of internet access was their cell phone. So in the open-ended portion of the survey, a lot of students commented on this second issue. So for example, this first student moved back to their home in a rural area and had to drive half an hour to download and upload their coursework. And for the second student, it sounds like they were expected to draw some equations or figures for their exam, which they couldn't do with the device that they had. So I'd point out that here that this fall, the majority of undergraduates will have the university iPad, but fourth year students and above still won't have it, and some transfer students won't have the iPad. So a different way to gauge student needs is also to give them a longer list of potential challenges and see which ones were most problematic for them. So for this question, we gave students a list of 11 challenges. They could choose up to 3, which made it difficult for them to attend remote classes. And then plus, there was an option to indicate if they had no challenges attending remote classes. So for this figure, some of the options are combined for clarity. And you can see that about 2/3 of students indicated that their home environment was not conducive to online learning due to either too much noise, too many people, or no study space. And I'd also point out that about 9% of our students had care responsibilities, which were either for their own children or for little siblings or cousins, or sometimes for family members who were ill. Only a quarter of our undergraduates had no challenges. In the open-ended comments, a lot of students expressed that being home with their family did not create a conducive environment for study. So for example, both of these students expressed that their parents didn't understand or wouldn't listen to their requirements for quiet and uninterrupted study. This first student said that having a formal schedule that would be strongly recommended by their teacher or the university would have helped them to draw firmer boundaries with their parents. And the second student emphasizes how much the sort of negotiation with their family around study time and space was a problem for their mental health. Another challenge to mental health for most students this spring was a sense of disconnection and erosion of their student identity. So for example, most undergraduates did not still find it easy to think of themselves as a college student or to feel successful as a college student. 82% of them felt like they lost touch with the university community. And in open-ended comments, many students mentioned feeling isolated and disconnected, which along with everything else that was going on in the spring was triggering some real mental health concerns. In terms of what instructors could do about that, students offered some constructive suggestions in the open-ended comments. So for example, this first student suggests that instructors could encourage more open dialogue about mental health and provide tips for coping, and definitely not just ignore it or brush it aside if a student brings it up. The second student suggests that instructors or other groups could just schedule more times to just talk. So as an instructor, this could mean, for example, that you encourage some casual social conversation on Zoom for a few minutes before the formal beginning of class. You could, have your Zoom session start maybe 10 minutes early, or you could host a few coffee conversations on specific topics of interest to your students, or you could set up a system for students to form study groups on Zoom. So those are the couple of points from the survey that I wanted to open up with, and now I'll turn it back to Jessica.
Thanks, Shauna. It's clear in hearing what you've talked through there that we can't solve all of the presenting challenges that are coming up for students, but clearly there are a few things that we can do to help address this need for support. I think it's a mix of instructors helping to take care of their students, but also themselves. So let's move into exploring some of these strategies alongside our panelists. I do want to just take a note that we are going to share a lot of links to resources in the chat today. So we will make sure that they're also in a follow-up email that goes out so that you aren't worried about losing some important information. Now, Cheryl, can you talk us through some strategies to address the needs of students who are maybe particularly vulnerable during this time?
Sure, thank you. I think that data is very compelling. And so I want to speak to some strategies that I can offer for instructors, especially as we think about supporting all students, but then also supporting students that have expressed that they have a disability to the university. And here are some strategies that we would suggest for you. The first would be to update your syllabi statement to make sure you have the most pertinent and relevant information related to referring folks to student life disability services. Other elements that can be very helpful is to make sure any newly created videos that you're presenting have captions, and to make sure that your digital resources that you are sharing also are accessible. And you can work with your unit's digital accessibility coordinator to help you with that. The vast majority of the students that are registered with disabilities in our office, the majority are students that actually have mental health or psychological disabilities. And so one of the strategies that I can encourage is for you to really think carefully and be strategic about how you manage participation and attendance requirements, especially when you're offering online synchronous delivery. In this time of COVID, we know that everyone has a level of angst and stress, as well as some of those barriers that Shauna had shared. But on top of that, students with mental health concerns may be also experiencing additional barriers. So taking those into consideration will be very useful. I want to move on to the next piece that I want to share, which is the new COVID-related accommodation process that our office has worked with the ADA coordinator's office to roll out university-wide. And this is for any student at any campus, as well as any level of their program. And this is a design program for us to be able to open up the request process for accommodations for COVID-related needs that may go beyond disability. And so some examples for that would be those that are on the high-risk list for the CDC as having being at high risk for additional complications if they were to contract COVID. Those that are under quarantine or isolation guidance from their medical professionals, or those that are in caregiving roles. And so what you can do is refer folks to this process so that we can guide them to resources that may be appropriate and to recommend accommodations as appropriate as well. The other shift that we want people to consider as you're instructing your courses is to think about how you might be able to keep teaching those students. Although an excused absence may be appropriate for those that are only in quarantine but are not yet ill and hopefully won't be, they really want to continue to make academic progress. And so if you're able to utilize the camera in your teaching space, if in person, to engage those students while they're online and in quarantine, that will really help them continue to make progress in your course. As always, Student Life Disability Services is here to consult with any instructor about how to balance your curricular needs and the rigor that you have built into your course, along with the students' needs.
Thanks, Cheryl. And as you and Shauna pointed out, that COVID-19 has really created challenges in areas like housing, food, and technology. And there are a couple of great hubs that I just want to call out for resources that are a good place to direct students to and are continuing to evolve. So the Safe and Healthy website space for current students is a great direction for students. Also, the Student Advocacy Center and off-campus and commuter services website are also really great places to send students. I want to talk for just a moment about technology. This has been a really hot topic recently as students are trying to figure out how to navigate being more online and using maybe more technology than they originally planned. And so there's a lot of conversations happening right now about how we can help to get students connected to the technology that they need to be successful. So as those conversations evolve, keep watching the Keep Learning sites and the Safe and Healthy Buckeyes websites for more information about what resources are coming that are available to students. But there are a few that exist right now that I want to call out in case they're useful. So there is information about free and reduced cost internet access across Ohio, including Wi-Fi parking lots on all of the campuses that students could potentially go to. There's also on the Digital Flagship website a way for students to take a look at the eligibility criteria to see if maybe they are eligible for a Digital Flagship technology kit. Those would be first, second, or third year students or new military students. And so the students could be directed there to check and see if they might be eligible. And then finally, I want to call out, there is some COVID-19 emergency funding that could also be available as an option for students. And so just going through that route to find out what's available and for students to have that conversation with someone would be really helpful as we sort of figure out what new and additional resources can be made available. So to dig more deeply into mental health and overall wellness, Michaela, what are your thoughts on what instructors could do to provide resources directly in their courses for students?
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. So not only, like Cheryl was mentioning, the basic needs of our students, but their mental health and holistic well-being should be at the forefront of every classroom this upcoming year. So ensure that you're checking in with your students before diving into the course content for the day. So it was mentioned to log on to Zoom maybe 10 minutes early, but also using this Zoom chat feature and asking students to share in one or a few words how they're feeling or doing today. Having these responses able to be viewed by all the students will help normalize the students' feelings that they may be having. A lot of times students are feeling alone in how they're processing things, and so seeing the experiences of their peers will be helpful. Also be honest in your response as a professor. Answer that question, and it's okay to show vulnerability with your students. So another way to show that you care about students' mental health and well-being is being knowledgeable about the resources available to them. So it's good to be informed of the resources, but make sure you're actively promoting those and encouraging your students to utilize the resources. So using the Carmen announcement portion, maybe post a new resource each week and highlight that. And that continuously shows your students throughout the semester that you're thinking about them and that you care. Also, we know that social well-being is a part of a student's mental health and their holistic well-being. So staying up to date with the events that not only Student Life is putting on, but the other academic units are hosting for their students, and informing your students of those events will be helpful. In the chat, there's a link to the Student Life calendar. That's where you can find all of the Student Life events that will be taking place this upcoming semester. So at Ohio State, it is really great that we have so many free resources for students, but sometimes that definitely can be difficult to keep up with. In January, with support from the Suicide and Mental Health Task Force, the university launched the Ohio State Wellness app. While the primary audience for this app is students, the Wellness app is an excellent resource for our faculty as well. So the Wellness app is university-wide collaboration with the goals of providing accessible education and information in connection to resources. There's also a goal-setting portion of the app which helps students to be proactive in taking care of their well-being. In the chat, the link to download it is there. So on the homepage, you'll find articles and videos that are sorted by one of the 9 dimensions of wellness, with the most relevant information pushed to the top. So for example, if you were to go to the homepage right now, there's a wellness wherever you are section to help our students contribute to their well-being while at home. There's also a listening, learning, and speaking out section that discusses students' rights, support resources, and how to have courageous conversations regarding the racial tensions in our country right now. So the Wellness App Committee is that university-wide collaboration with Student Life, Digital Flagship, Distance Education, Academic Affairs, a variety of students who meet regularly to update the content. So I encourage you all to download and familiarize yourself with the app. And if time allows, present about the app in your class. If not, you'll still be prepared to walk a student through the app who needs support. I can personally speak as a staff member. I've learned a lot using the app, so I hope that you will find that information useful too. In the app, you'll find sections for students in crisis, which has crisis response resources. The app is organized by support topics ranging from anxiety to physical wellness to nutrition and body image. And then also the goal setting portion where students can set daily, weekly, or monthly goals to proactively manage their well-being. So in addition to the Wellness app, the Mental Health Task Force helped launch the Peer Access Line in the Student Wellness Center. So the Peer Access Line is a non-crisis peer-to-peer helpline that students can call Monday through Friday from 8 p.m. to midnight to gain connection to resources. So a student may call the Peer Access Line to discuss academic struggles, roommate family issues, relationship concerns, or even navigating the transition to online learning. So this is one of the many offerings of the Student Wellness Center, and I will gladly serve as a personal connection if you'd like to learn more about the Student Wellness Center or refer a student to our office. In the chat, you'll find the link to the Peer Access Line. I also want to highlight a new staff role we have in the Wellness Center whose primary goal is to provide support to faculty and staff to incorporate wellness in their environments. One initiative that will be released in the coming weeks is a faculty toolkit. So this will be linked on the Keep Teaching website and other university websites. This toolkit will provide info and resources related to the 9 dimensions of wellness, ideas on activities you could do in the classroom, inclusive language to consider, motivational interviewing, and active listening techniques. This toolkit will be continuously updated throughout the academic year. I also encourage you to check out Counseling and Consultation Services informational page for staff and faculty. That is linked in the chat as well.
Thank you so much, Michaela, and thank you, Cheryl. I would love to hear from one of our students now. Zach, from your personal student perspective, what are some of the best ways for instructors to get these resources that Cheryl and Michaela have talked about out to you in a way that feels comfortable?
Yeah, so I think one of the most constructive ways is just understanding that students may be embarrassed to reach out for help, and understanding that we can collaborate with each other to find a constructive way to bring the two worlds together, and help students explain their situations a little bit more. When I first moved to Ohio State, I was really struggling with food and financial insecurity, and I would rather not reach out to my professor for help or even just looking for the resources. So I think if we could establish maybe a Q&A that says, how often do you find yourself struggling to find your next meal? Or do you find yourself short on bills often? Or how, are you doing outside of the classroom? Understanding that there is life outside of the classroom, I think could be very constructive to a more productive environment. And maybe send out an email, once a month or once a week, or just post notifications in the Carmen, saying like, if you are struggling with X, Y, or Z, then we have these resources here available to help you out. Just making students feel included and that we're cared for, I think will be very productive. Because again, like when I was first coming here, I was really struggling with these things as well. And if that's just me, think about the other students who are going through the same situations as well. Like we saw in the slides earlier that, students aren't feeling like they're students anymore. And 2/3 of our students are, struggling with some type of insecurity. And so we can just post these, notifications of what we have on campus and start out with just a questionnaire to gather data about who our students really are, I think would be very helpful, to moving forward and making sure all of our students are included and, are safe and they're having all their basic needs met.
Thank you so much, Zach. I think it's really powerful to share that students may not reach out actively to ask for help because of many reasons. They may feel embarrassed to do so, they're uncertain. And so I think what's beautiful about this is sharing these resources may help students that you never realized you helped. And so I think, thank you for sharing your own personal experience with that, Zach. So shifting gears just a little bit to talking about the classroom and academic success. Jasmine, as faculty, what are some of the ways that you would recommend addressing both wellness and strategies for academic success?
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. That's a great question and something I've thought a great deal about. I think this moment that we're living in right now provides a great opportunity for us to create a culture of wellness with students that can really lead to pathways for academic success. And so for me, this means humanizing the classroom experience for students. Teaching with empathy is a fundamental part of my teaching philosophy. And so if we're talking about addressing wellness as a pathway for support for academic success, one way I accomplish that is by designing my class and curriculum with my students' mental health in mind. And I have very, very, very candid conversations about my own mental health journey with my students very early on, if not the first day of class. So when I, reach the point in my syllabus, when I talk about the mental health and overall wellness services that are available to them on campus, and I not only direct them to those services, but I also discuss how I'm currently in therapy and have been in and out of therapy for the past 14 years, how enjoyable yet challenging those experiences have been. So, that way I'm showing them that I am taking advantage of similar services and how it has provided so many benefits. So this has proven to be very, very powerful to students. And I cannot tell you how many of my own students have thanked me for being transparent in that way. So allowing myself to be human in front of my students has enabled me to teach with equity in mind and to make certain accommodations for students who need it the most. Students are more inclined to reach out to you for help and to use the resources that are available on campus if we lead with empathy first and foremost. They are also more likely to respond to professors and faculty who are human and take risk in the classroom by being vulnerable. And I think sometimes faculty have in their mind what the image of a professor or faculty member is and what we should or should not be talking about. But our students are really yearning for human connection, probably now more than ever, just like faculty are. So I encourage faculty listening to this town hall to lead and teach with empathy. Yes, we have to get through content in our classes along with managing our own wellness as faculty while trying to be understanding of our student situation. Again, that can be very, very difficult. But I think one thing to keep in mind that will help with balancing all of that is that we are teaching students, not content. And this applies in an in-person and online learning environment. And what I mean by we are teaching students and not content is that we need to keep our students' wellness in mind first and foremost. If we want them to succeed academically. Students will remember that more about your class and who you are as a professor rather than the content you cover. Students, they're not just knowledge buckets where we dump all this content into. They are people. So all in all, I want to create a classroom environment where all of my students can show up as their full selves. But especially students who come from marginalized backgrounds because they don't typically get to do that for a variety of reasons. So the most powerful way that I can create this pathway for academic success for my students is bringing my full self to the classroom. I also try to place more of an emphasis on fostering that human connection and providing a space for student autonomy and agency over just getting through the content. Because the content will come, but radical empathy for students and faculty cannot, and it really should not wait.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. I think it's just so powerful. I think that acknowledgement that we're really all trying to find our way amidst all of the new challenges, and that little brief moment of vulnerability, whatever it is at the beginning of the course, to just say, yeah, I'm trying to figure this out too. It can make a big difference for students in feeling like, okay, I'm not the only one struggling right now. I'm not the only one trying to figure this out. And it also gets at the feelings of, needing those basic needs to be met. If you're not sure where you're going to get your next meal, it's hard to study and be successful. So thank you for sharing all of that and really leading with compassion. So just a quick add, as we think about what instructors can do to help students, some of this is really finding ways to empower them. So the Dennis Learning Center has some fantastic on-demand resources for students to help with online learning, dealing with perfectionism. If you're a perfectionist right now, is a really difficult time, and other key topics for success. So be sure to check that out. And in that vein of empowering students, Liz, we heard in the COVID-19 survey that some students found it hard to manage distraction in their home environments. I think we can all probably understand that. What are some ways students could be empowered to work through this?
Thanks, Jessica. So there are a few strategies that I want to highlight that you as an instructor can share with your students to help them advocate for themselves, to find a quiet space in their house that allows them to work effectively. So one of the most important things is to have a house meeting, whether it's with family members you live with or housemates. I live with 6 other students. We're actually going to be having a meeting soon to discuss quiet time and using our shared living spaces during the day for classes. Another strategy is to have a group message with everyone that you live with. This would just be a good way to maybe remind someone they're being a little loud while you're in class, or maybe you have a presentation at 3 o'clock that day you need, some silence for. And another strategy is to maybe develop a shut door policy so that everyone in your house can understand if your door is shut, it's because you don't want to be disturbed. You're in class working on an assignment. And it's just a visual cue that you are unavailable at that time. There are also some more student-curated suggestions for managing distractions and advocating for yourself in your home that we're going to put in the chat. But if all else fails, as an instructor, you can remind your students there are open campus spaces that are going to be available for students to socially distance and get their work done this year.
Thank you so much, Liz, and thanks for mentioning that link in the chat. We had some students who were able to pull together their ideas there, and it's fantastic. So thank you. So now shifting to gaps in digital skills. So we know that students' digital skills, it ranges across a wide spectrum. There are students who have little to no experience with really using technology for academics, and then we have students who are much more savvy than any of us on this webinar when it comes to technology. So Zach and Liz, what resources exist that instructors could point students to help to fill that gap that may exist? Zach, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, perfect. So now that we're in a time where we are using technology 100% of the time, there will be questions, there will be issues. Students will find themselves confused. At Digital Flagship, we offer tech tutoring to students who may have questions with the spaces that we use, such as Carmen, Microsoft Office, or the Digital Flagship technology kits that we have. We are starting up our live chat support on August 12th. And so this will help students have real-time, information and help to help them understand the technology that they have and to navigate these spaces a little more efficiently. Last thing to touch on is that, the experiences that they're having with these, the Digital Flagship students as well, I feel like that's all going to help them with a more, relatable experience with the whole technology and the spaces that we have to offer. So by pointing them in the Digital Flagship direction will help with these issues a lot more efficiently.
Thanks, Zach. Liz, what do you think?
Yeah, in addition to tech tutoring, I think if instructors maybe utilize Carmen discussion threads or announcements to offer digital resources, that's a great way to fill in these digital literacy gaps. I also think it's really important to allow students to post different resources too in these dedicated threads, because sometimes students are the ones in the class who might have more knowledge of working through different tech issues that arise, and it will just help get solutions to the entire classroom community in a more effective way. So, just having that peer-to-peer format in your Carmen course would be a great way. And you can even weave in these resources in a Carmen page, like this one that's available in Canvas Commons that we're putting in the chat. And there is another resource in the chat too that can show you how to import content from Canvas Commons into your courses if you need a bit of help with that.
Thank you, Zach and Liz. Those are really cool ideas to bridging that gap. In addition to those, one really important thing that you can do as well is implementing low or no risk assignments to help bridge that gap and have students practice technology usage. An example would be if you have students submitting a PDF for an exam, releasing an assignment a few days before that is essentially just submit a blank PDF or a PDF with like a very simple problem in order to practice that submission process and make sure that the students have all the resources that they need. In addition, trying to mimic the same sort of resources students would have in class online, such as like open office hours during exams. So like having a Zoom classroom where someone can go to where you can like sit in so students can come and ask a question in person rather than over an email, much in the way that if a student had a question during an exam, they would be able to walk up to the front of the room and ask. But really making sure that you're providing those opportunities for students to practice the use of technology and engage in the use of technology without having the high risk assignments. We're now going to move over to the Q&A section. And first off, we're going to answer some of the questions that were sent our way before the session started. So as we think about what instructors can do to help students, we know there's some fear about doing or saying the wrong thing. Cheryl, what advice can you offer instructors who may have that concern?
I think it's really common for us to be afraid that we'll say the wrong thing and do some harm. It comes out of being good people with empathetic, caring orientations. But I think that the way I try to shift the narrative for myself is to look at the possibilities of the good that I might be able to create by connecting a student to resources. And so just acknowledging that we're all human, that we're doing the best that we can, and we may not have the right answers, but that you're here to help, to offer resources and to help students get connected while we all try to make the best of and have a wonderful autumn semester is my recommendation.
Thank you. Zach, what are your thoughts on this?
At the end of the day, we're all human. We're not going to know all the right answers. We're not going to know the right things to say. And I think that's perfectly fine. Just showing that you care and that you want your students to succeed, I think will be sufficient enough. And then just put them in the right direction to find the resources that they need. Like, you may not, as a professor, as an individual, you may not know the right thing to say, but you could help them find out what the solution is. So just with having that in mind, don't put too much stress on yourself as an individual to feel like you need to have the answers at all times. Just be willing to work with the student to find out what the solution to the problem is.
Thank you, Zach. That's my 7-month-old maybe making an appearance here in just a moment. So she's lovely. So it'll only add to the wonderful webinar. So I want to just throw out another question. And I mentioned this earlier about all of this really addressing the balance between taking care of students and taking care of yourselves. So how can instructors balance student needs with their own? Jasmine, what are your thoughts on this as a faculty member?
That is such a great question and good point, because while we need to focus on supporting students, we also have to consider faculty wellness, because we can't truly advocate for student wellness without modeling this for them. Of course, many of us are still struggling. For example, we have a family caregiving crisis going on because of COVID-19 that has disproportionately affected women and people of color. And what this means in terms of for academic institutions and faculty is that this has in turn affected the teaching and research programs of scholars of color and women. First, we have to be faculty. We have to be intentional about our wellness. I learned the very, very hard way last semester that breaks are not something that are given. It's something that I have to take. And that resting is not, self-indulgent. Rather, it's like really critical to my teaching and scholarship. So I just want to encourage faculty to be gracious and compassionate with ourselves. I mean, we're still going through a pandemic. And so this idea that I have to be the exact same professor to my students as I was pre-COVID, or that I have to be just as productive, if not more productive than previously, for me at least, that's just not realistic. And the goal is not to be perfect. And again, I encourage you all to share with your students how you're managing the challenges of this pandemic. That helps, of course, develop a rapport with students. And, I think it allows them to be more intentional about their wellness and discuss their situations with you. And then lastly, remember, we're part of an amazing community here at Ohio State, and to seek assistance ourselves. I know I've called on a lot of my colleagues for assistance now more than ever, and it's affirming to see how so many of them have risen to the occasion.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts, Jasmine. I think you're so on top of trying to figure out the right ways to balance this. So well done. Michaela, from a wellness perspective, what are your thoughts on what's available to faculty?
Yeah, so I encourage faculty to look into Buckeye Wellness. That's a program through the College of Nursing that supports faculty and staff well-being, so for your personal self. So they recently launched a 7-week Stay Well course, which helps with coping during the pandemic and with other social issues occurring in the country. Buckeye Wellness throughout the year provides workshops, classes, and online resources on a variety of wellness topics. So staying up to date with that. We also have the Employee Assistance Program, which can connect you to other resources and other things for basic needs as well.
Thanks, Michaela. And I'm going to jump into a couple questions that came through the Q&A chat. One of them being around a template survey Zach mentioned this about maybe doing some assessment at the beginning of the course to see what your students might be needing. And that same thing came up actually in our last webinar as well, when we were talking about inclusiveness and just thinking about what student needs might be. So I wanted to comment on that. It actually is fairly easy to add a survey into your Carmen course just by using the survey tool right there in the course. We don't have a template that has the pre-populated questions, because we learned that some academic units and some colleges might be approaching this sort of together and might be sharing out a survey at the beginning of the course for students as a whole, and we want some coherence and some consistency there. But I think that that's something that we can keep our eye on. And if we are able to pull together something very basic, just keep your eye out for new items on the Keep Teaching site. And that's where a resource like that will live. But at the very least, building something yourself if you need to and throwing a couple questions in there is actually fairly easy to do just in Carmen directly. There was another question about housing, and I'm going to see if maybe Michaela or Cheryl, you might have some answers to this around what resources might be available for students who live off campus, but maybe need to isolate or quarantine, and if there are resources available. Cheryl, that might be one for you. I'm not sure if that's come up in some of your conversations.
For students that live off campus that are needing additional accommodation or support, the COVID accommodation request process would be probably a good place for them to start. And then we can try to make sure that we're triaging them to the correct resources to get them the support that they need.
Okay, thanks, Cheryl. It's nice to know that there's kind of this nice process that we can point students to that will ultimately get them into the mix of getting the resources to meet their needs. So that's great to know because there are so many resources. Sometimes the challenge is just finding the right one. Another question that came up was around the getting resources to students right there in Carmen. And this came up, I believe Liz mentioned a Carmen page that you can import into your course from the campus Commons. And so if that's something that you're interested in doing, that will be in the list of resources. It's in the chat, I'm sure, buried amongst all of the links that we've shared. But we'll also share that out in the follow-up email so that if you want to bring that into your course, you can. And it does have some links to things like technology support, like technology teaching and learning, like how do I use the technology for my assignments, and then also wellness related resources that point to like the Safe and Healthy Buckeyes website and the CCS website and other really key places for students. But sharing that or sharing those resources in an announcement, you can even pre-program the announcement is a great idea. So jumping back into our questions that we have prepared here from what people had submitted in their registration. New this fall are masks for in-person classes and for those on campus. And I know that there's a concern for instructors about what to do if students aren't wearing masks. So this feels like maybe a good place to bring that up. What guidance could we give them? Meg, I'm going to toss this question to you.
Sure, thank you. I think the best place to start is to assume that students who aren't wearing masks have forgotten their mask or otherwise their good intentions to follow the pledge have somehow run aground. And so we encourage faculty to begin with just encouraging students to put on their mask, offering them some resources if they don't have their mask with them. You may have, if you teach a large classroom in person, you may want to bring some masks or know where masks are nearby on campus. And so begin by just asking students to comply, to put on a mask. If the student can't comply because they have a health condition, for example, and they, asthma or some other condition where they don't feel comfortable wearing a mask, encourage them to register with SLDS so that they can safely get course content and have their health situation accommodated without endangering other students. So just a redirect to SLDS for students who have health concerns with wearing a mask. Students who are resistant to the idea of putting on a mask, and who are unwilling to go and get one or to register with SLDS, you'll need to ask those students to leave class. If they refuse to leave class, you'll need to dismiss the class. One thing to realize is that dismissing a class should be the step you take before reaching out to outside authorities like OSU PD or some other external authority. You want to dismiss the class and then follow up with the appropriate reporting lines rather than starting there. One, it gets students out of the classroom. If there's a student not wearing a mask, you're all at greater risk, and you'll want to minimize the time of that situation. And two, it is more likely to escalate if you're waiting for respondents and bringing in external parties. Just dismiss the class and move forward with those resources afterwards. And there are resources on Safe and Healthy Teaching and in other places that reiterate this advice. But again, it begins with assuming students want to do the right thing and are just in a moment and need support as they get used to wearing a mask.
Thank you so much for that, Meg. For our next question, how can instructors provide digital literacy support upfront for students? What might up the chances of students using those resources? Liz, if you want to talk about this.
Yeah, I think a great way to provide digital literacy support is to provide specific tutorials for like technology you're actually going to be using in your course that students often struggle with. And maybe you can incorporate these into a Carmen module or other Carmen pages. So if you're a course that uses Excel and every year students have trouble with it, maybe make a tutorial or send them some links to get support right up front. I also think if an instructor is worried about the chances of students using these, it's important just to gauge whether you are in a synchronous or in-person class, asking if people need help, or maybe putting another sort of questionnaire on Carmen. If you just ask students to be honest with you and that it's okay if they don't know, you can provide them the resources they need.
Thank you so much for that, Liz. Zach, any insight?
Yeah, I think Liz was very on point with what she said, just providing the specific resources and reaching out to students to see what they need help with, like what they're comfortable using, and maybe just providing some extra assignments, maybe a small extra credit or just a small file, low risk that is, assessing where students are at, when it comes to technology and like the resources they need help with.
Thanks so much, Zach. So I want to throw out a question that came in through the Q&A around students who, kind of how instructors might differentiate or not between students who really need some of this flexibility and accommodation versus those who maybe don't need it but are asking for it. So just kind of figuring out how we might address that. Cheryl, would you be able to share your thoughts on that?
Can you reframe that one for me?
Yeah, so just thinking about those students who are, maybe requesting some accommodations informally through their instructor or wanting some extensions on timelines, but maybe there's a fear about students taking advantage of the situation right now. So I'm just curious your thoughts.
Sure, thank you. I think that, part of it is being careful about how you construct your expectations at the front end, making it clear to folks that if they're going to need flexibility due to something that they can see coming down the pike, or they know, for example, that class is meeting when there are going to be, other family members sort of running amok in the household or things like that, that you want to encourage them to talk with you in advance if they're perceiving that there are going to be barriers or challenges to the participation or attendance expectations that you set, and also being, forthright about how you will or won't be grading and how that rubric would be assessed up in advance, so they know how to manage and meet your expectations. Obviously, none of us can completely eliminate students who may not have the best intentions at heart. But I think what we need to do is always err on the side of positive intent, that students want to do well, they want to participate, and always, feel free to consult with our office if a student is asking for a formal accommodation, and we can obviously help you navigate that process.
Thanks, Cheryl. There was another question that came in about what if Carmen fails? Dun, dun, dun. No, there would not be enough emojis in the world to reflect the feelings that would happen with that. And I think that's coming from years ago, the infamous Carmageddon, when Carmen went down for a number of days. And I can assure you that our system is built now to not allow that to happen, and that we're ready for the bandwidth needs as they come forward, and we're ready for our students to be in Carmen and to be successful in Carmen. But should that happen, the Keep Teaching site is where you should go to find out what do we do now. So I'll jump back into our list of questions that people had submitted last week. So we've talked a little bit about the different kinds of students and the grad students, undergrad students, and all the different needs that are there. What about transfer students? So is there anything similar to maybe STEP that is available for transfer students? And for this one, I'm actually going to invite our Q&A moderator, Amy Treboni, to chime in along with Shauna.
All right, you caught me a little off guard because I was answering a question. There are resources available for transfer students, and most of them will go through a new student orientation and meet with an academic advisor. There were also some questions about their ability to participate in certain programs, such as the Second Year Transformational Experience Program, or STEP. And STEP does have openings for transfer students. I think at this point for this coming fall, it's probably too late for a student. But as you're looking forward or thinking about a transfer student you might have worked with in the past, or that is in fact your own student at your home, those kinds of options are made available to transfer students who are eligible based on when they graduated from high school. Shauna, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd like to add that if you are a faculty member or program coordinator who has a particular interest in campus change or transfer students, we have a campus change and transfer student work group that is focused on helping to ensure the success of these students at the Columbus campus. So if you're interested in joining that work group or just being informed of what's going on, feel free to send me an email on jaggers.2.
Thanks so much, Shauna. I wanted to pull up for a moment here the new Keep Learning website. We've talked about a lot of resources today, and we just launched a new site here to reflect the student-facing resources associated with the strategies we've talked about with instructors. So I want to share this as another resource for students, a place that you can point students to. So where we had talked about ways to reduce stress and build connection between instructors and students, we also have some strategies for students to do that. And those are reflected here, along with videos that our students created with some of the tips and the best practices, things that really helped them in advocating for themselves and others, and then also in building the key skills that they need to really be successful. So please do use this as a resource as well, and we'll pop the link. And this is the place to send students as they have questions about technology and about being successful as a student and who's studying online, or maybe in a hybrid sort of situation. So I want to take a moment, and I'm actually going to snag my little daughter here, because we are in such interesting times right now where our children are in as many Zoom meetings as we are. And so let's just take a moment and acknowledge that the shift to online learning this spring was hard, and it was fast, and it was tough for instructors and students alike. But there was another shift that occurred in spring 2020. Our graduates will now enter a pandemic and a post-pandemic world. Their ability to problem solve, to innovate, and to use technology in meaningful ways is going to be exponentially more urgent and important. And in this, your work with students is also very important. It's going to be important to be empathetic, but also still guide rigorous development of new skills and knowledge that those students are going to need. But this semester is not likely to be the easiest or the smoothest. No matter how committed you are to your students, you're also balancing commitments to family, to your health, to your mental health. And I know that over the last few webinars, we've shared so many strategies and so many things that we hope will be helpful in working with students. My encouragement is not to be overwhelmed by that, and to just start by choosing one thing from the Keep Teaching website to implement in the first week of class, because even one of those things is going to make a big difference for you and for students. So we've shared a lot of resources today in the chat. You'll also find those resources on the Keep Teaching and the Keep Learning sites and in the email follow-up. We'll send you a recording of today's webinar, won't we? And a survey to get your feedback and questions that we weren't able to answer. We are going to compile them and send them to you in a follow-up email. Thank you all so much for being a part of this. Ellie's super excited too. We appreciate you, and we know that you're here because you're committed to your students and you want to do right by them. So thank you so much for all the care that you take every single day.